We'll let people in as they arrive, but most people have now come through. Um, do suggest that you go to speak with you rather than have everybody up, just so you see things a bit more clearly. Today, I will be sharing a screen for most of what I'm saying. It is just me today. Hopefully that's okay. Yeah, if you go to speak with you, but it'll be a shared screen for much of it. Now, I think we've got quite a few people joining us today who maybe didn't come to our series in the spring and summer. This is our autumn series of Wednesday webinars, and this is the second one. We're going to be looking at a proposed certification scheme that BASIS is going to be delivering, and this is an opportunity to talk to you guys about it and try and get some of your feedback as well. Those of you who have been to these webinars before know that when I introduce, I often go through a list of some news items and impacts that I've observed over the preceding week or two. Haven't been able to do that this time round, but just watching the news at lunchtime, there was a piece on bridges in London and the issues that there are with the bridges crossing the Thames in London. And it was interesting. They said there are now 3 problems with these: the basics of the engineering, the construction. You know, they're getting a bit old now, so the age is also an issue. But the third problem they came up with maintaining infrastructure in London was climate change. And for it to specifically come out as an issue to be reported on the news, I think is something that is a real step forward, that this is now becoming kind of a mainstream type of issue. And the other thing I've been looking at recently, just a conversation yesterday, and this is something that's maybe is a bit intuitive for some, but I had a conversation with an academic yesterday. We started talking about something called habit displacement theory. And it's all about how when people are confronted with change, they're also more likely to then change and maintain that different behavior moving forward. So in a sense, this lockdown that we have at the moment and the massive impact it's having on sport, potentially a silver lining coming from it could be that if we can now change things, if we can now change the way we do things in our venues, in our clubs, that will stick with people because they're already ready for those changes. So just some thoughts is something I'm going to be looking at a lot more. In terms of a little bit of housekeeping, please do remain on mute. I'm very happy for you to ask questions through the presentation or hold them until the end. We're planning to have a good few minutes of discussion at the end. But do raise your hand throughout or put your questions into the chat feature and I'll do my best to answer all of those questions. So I will now jump to sharing my screen. Hopefully you've got the screen up now. So as we mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about this certification scheme for the management and operation of sports venues. So just a quick structure, introduction, drivers. Do we actually need another scheme? What is the point? Why did we actually decide to try and do this? A bit about the process, how it actually works, review and development, the structure, what are we actually looking at here, the guidance behind it, current position, immediate actions, and then Q&A with you guys. So what's behind this? Well, BASIS and members of BASIS, we've actually been talking about this for 4 years or so, and it's been quite a long gestation. We've gone through quite a few changes, different approaches. The first formal draft that we pulled together was in November 2017. And then we put that out to a public consultation in June 2018 and got a lot of useful responses, and that changed quite a lot. So it's been 2 years since then, and we've been developing and changing, and we've been close to wanting to publish it. But we've just got to the point now where we feel that we're ready to do it. To be honest, it was ready to go, or we felt ready to go, although we have made some more changes, but we felt it was ready to go earlier in the year, but it wasn't the right moment. to put this out with the current situation that we're in. So we've called it a certification scheme. It will rank people, it will score the performance of different venues. But really what it does, it's an assessment or a snapshot of current processes, but it also provides an opportunity to look at ongoing improvement in performance with regular reporting of performance data. So it's a certification from that perspective, that it will give a ranking, it will give a benchmark, it will demonstrate how a venue is performing, how they're doing, but it doesn't match an ISO standard or something. I'll come back to those sorts of things in just a moment. What we found through the consultation part of this and talking to venues and talking to people about this is that, and when they've seen the structure, the feedback that we've got has really said, this provides a framework, and this now is a huge element of this, is that when people go through this process, and you'll understand, I hope, when I go through the elements and the structure of it, it actually provides a framework and provides a lot more elements to think about. It actually makes people realize that, you know, we might be doing great things in one particular area, you know, very, very good performance, but we just haven't thought about this other aspect. So we've tried to keep it broad, and you'll see the structure in just a moment as I go through it. Now, clearly there are other options out there. There are a lot of standards of some sort or another, and British and international standards are absolutely key. We're not saying ours is better. We're not saying it should replace these other standards. It's quite a different thing. We feel that what we've produced can be, and arguably should be, complementary to other management systems, and it will fit with any management system. It will fit with, I'll say, no management system at all. By that I mean sort of no formal management system type approach. Clearly everybody has a way of managing what they do. But our certification scheme, we believe, will fit with any structured management system that there is. So the drivers behind this really were a few years ago. A few of our members had been awarded ISO management systems. For example, the ISO 20012-1 event management, and they started to express that they felt they'd gone as far as they could with that system. It's a different approach. It's actually the system that is being assessed more so than the actual performance. Now, let me be absolutely clear. Of course, if you're not performing very well, any good auditor is going to question that. It's going to question the scope of what you're doing within that management system. But it isn't explicitly looking at performance necessarily in the processes in place. So we started talking about, could there be a performance-based approach that really looks at the processes and the actual performance of what you're doing? So that's where our conversation started. So I've actually got a quick video now. Darren Crossman, that many of you know from Principality Stadium, can't be with us today, so I just recorded this briefly. And it was some conversations primarily with Darren that actually started off what we're doing. So I'll just play this video. So I'm joined by Darren Crossman from Principality Stadium. Darren is the Facilities and Safety Manager at Principality. And Darren's history with sustainability goes way back, probably 10 years or so, when he first started at the Principality Stadium, back when it was the Millennium Stadium, in fact. So, Darren, can you just give us a brief history of your certification, actually, at Principality? Because I think you were the first venue to achieve a certification to a sustainability standard in the UK.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. Yeah, absolutely. We were the first mainland UK stadium to achieve what was BS 9001, Sustainable Events Management Standards. We achieved that in September 2010, although it wasn't awarded until April 2011. When I first started there 10 years ago, that was my first one of the major parts of my job was to develop the sustainability for the stadium and to achieve the certification. Previously to that, I hadn't really had a great deal to do with sustainability, so it was quite a steep learning curve. Implementing the standard really was a case of reading it and then sort of reverse engineering a lot of the good work that was being done by the team on site already, and documenting it, and then moving forward with it. So as we said, subsequently we achieved the certification, and then that morphed into ISO 2012-1. Although we were an Olympic venue, we chose not to upgrade at the time to the international standard in time for the Olympics. We thought we'd just wait for our regular review cycle to come round and then change as part of the review cycle.
And you actually renewed the ISO 2012-1 certification a number of times, didn't you?
Yeah, we stayed for, it escapes me now, I think it was a five or six cycles. So we developed the system from scratch until we reached maturity on the maturity matrix. And then we spent a couple of years at full maturity, where we were just, it's the wrong phrase, but ticking over effectively, which for us was okay. Until we started examining the whole process and looking at what the standard was providing for us. In terms of providing a management system, absolutely excellent. You can't fault it. It makes you think about your management processes, etc. But as we've been in the maturity field for a while, we started to look at it, and we wanted to sort of show more what our output was and be judged more on our output than how we were managing the output. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of stepped away from the third-party certification from ISO, and we're still following the principles, but we've gone it alone, and we're looking more at how we can show and prove what we're actually doing is delivering tangible results that people can judge us on.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it right to say that you were looking for something that was more performance based? We
Absolutely
started a conversation around this time. We started a conversation, and we've actually worked together on this and developing this certification standard.
Yeah, you know, performance based is the right thing to say. Yeah, exactly that, because okay, I'm a realist. I think you will never ever achieve 100% of everything, but as long as we continue to reach there and towards it, and showing that we are going that way, then I think that's the right thing, not just for us, but I think that's the right thing for everybody to be trying to achieve. And certainly the conversations we had that led us in the right direction, I think have proved worthwhile.
Brilliant, perfect, Darren. Thank you. So as Darren's input, Darren's thoughts and his background in terms of certification. So jumping into what our proposal is, what the proposed certification scheme at BASIS is wanting to offer. The process is fairly straightforward, and many of you that have already looked at an ISO standard will probably think this is quite similar to the plan, do, check, act approach that the ISO standards provide. The green points are where BASIS has involvement with the venue. The orange is where the venue does its own thing. So we just start off, it's a very simple process. We start off just engaging, assessing and benchmarking. The venue takes that report away, looks at it, decides what to do, what to implement next, then we reassess. Simple as that, and we continue that iterative process moving forward. So just to go for a wee bit more detail on that. So in terms of engagement, assessment and benchmarking, so the venue will make contact with us. BASIS will provide 2 booklets. We've actually got 3 and a 4th booklet being prepared at the moment with information around this scheme. But we provide the initial information about the structure, how this process works, and then there's a guidance booklet, which I'll come to a bit later. So the venue commits to undertake the assessment. At the moment, what we're doing to start with is an online review. So we'll go through the whole of the assessment with the venue, with representatives of the venue, whether that's one person or 2 or 3 people that have responsibility. We've taken around 2.5 hours to do this. So it's an afternoon. We go through everything and we'll highlight where we need to get some performance data. So it's 2.5 hours plus that time for data retrieval. If you've got the data to hand, and this is things like your energy use, your water use, your waste management figures. If that data is already collected and is to hand, relatively simple. If you need to pull that together, then clearly there's a bit more time to it. And from that review and that data, we'll provide a benchmark report. Now, moving forward, the plan is to include a gold, silver, bronze type of ranking in terms of performance. Initially, we're not going to do that for the first few venues coming through, and that's simply because we want some empirical data to understand where people are. If the first venue comes through and we award them a gold, and then suddenly the second and third perform even better, our arbitrary positions may not have been correct. So our preference is to gather some empirical data, get a good idea of where people are performing at the moment, and we'll implement the gold, silver, bronze moving forward. Now, the intention isn't that BASIS would then publicise what people have done. It will be up to the venue to publicise, should they wish, what their actual score and what their ranking will be. The venue will get an anonymised ranking. It will be across everybody who's taken this, gone through this scheme, but then also we'll hone it down to the relevant venues. So if you're a football stadium, you'll be compared to other football venues, but equally, if you're a venue of a certain size, a certain capacity, we will compare you across football, rugby, cricket, other sports, just dependent on the data that we actually have available and how we can make those links. So there will be a ranking and there will be a comparison to other venues as well. Review, plan, act, improve. This is, like I said, this is the venue's response. It will be down to the venue's internal processes. They've got the gap analysis, they've got the review. We'll point out where they're strong, we'll point out where they're weak, and then it's up to them to implement this, whether it's with a green team, with implementing an ISO standard, or whatever the process is. And clearly there'll be ongoing support for BASIS members once they've done this. And then phase 3, we'd be looking at an annual review to review the improved performance. We could be persuaded to make it biennial, but regular data gathering is useful, and regular review of that improved performance. And then again, we simply report back. You get the gap analysis versus the framework, recommendations will be made, a new ranking assessed, the gold, silver or bronze, and then that anonymized benchmark position against other venues as well. Please do put any questions into the chat at any point. Happy to address them, or like I say, you can hang on until the end. So the ongoing and review and development for the standard. Best practice in sustainability is always going to change. There'll be new techniques, new technologies, new legislation. So we need to update this. So we've said at the moment there'll be a formal review of the scheme every 2 years, and that will be both for the guidance and the actual questions that are being asked as part of the scheme. So this is now the actual structure and how we're looking at this. I'll put this in a diagram shortly as well, so it should all pull together. But we're looking at 5 what we call elements, and these cut across everything in the scheme. So management, how do you actually do things? How do you prioritize roles and responsibilities? Is there training and awareness in place? How do you gather the data? How do you monitor the data? How do you report that data? So all of that element around how you actually manage your sustainability impacts and what you do around it. The policy and practice, we'll be looking for evidence of how you've actually implemented. You've done the management bit, all the stuff behind, then what are the policies that are in place? Are there formal written policies? Is it understood? Is it that people know that they should be doing certain things at certain times? In which case we probably question that and prefer a written policy. But how do you actually communicate these things and put them in place? So some evidence of that. The performance is the actual performance data. So we'd be looking for information from your energy bills, from your water, from your waste management company. That's the kind of information we're going to be looking after. Innovation. Frankly, this simply is to mop up where we might have missed something, where we've not asked a question, and a venue is actually doing something different and something good in this area, tell us about it. Tell us what you're doing. Extra points will be available. And maybe it'll be included in a future iteration. But really, we know that we probably haven't picked up 100% of every issue. So where a venue is doing something different, then we will actually review that and we'll get extra points. And then we've decided to call this Future Generations. It kind of reflects the Welsh Government and the Future Generations Act, which then actually requires that government to look forward at the implications of any of their actions that they take. So this is basically planning, but it's not planning 6 months in advance or a year in advance. We've called it Future Generations to suggest this is planning your philosophy moving forward. What point do you want to be at in 20, 30, 50 years' time? It's your long-term thoughts on where you want to be. So it's a longer-term issue. We've got 12 principles in this, and they're listed there. I won't run through all of them, but I'm going to give a couple of examples. And some of you will already have noticed the different colours, and again, they'll become clear in a moment. Many of you will immediately jump to the conclusion that probably the correct conclusion around the three elements, the three pillars of sustainability being environmental, economic and social. But again, clarity in just a moment. So just some examples around what these principles actually mean. We've got the title, but then we actually describe them within our guidance documents. So just a few examples. So for energy and emissions, we've described this as to minimise greenhouse gas emissions from all sources, including buildings, equipment, other operational sources, including emissions from non-energy sources such as refrigeration. Materials and chemicals. To use sustainable, healthy, non-toxic products and raw materials with low embodied energy, which is sourced locally and made from reusable, recyclable and or recycled resources. All of these principles really are aspirational. You may not be able to hit every requirement within these, but it's saying what the aspiration ought to be and then how to actually reach that. Economy and community, to support and have a positive impact on the local economy and local community, including community engagement. And then just the final example, accessibility and equality, to provide facilities and services that are physically accessible to all and provide a welcoming atmosphere to all with a knowledgeable and confident staff. And how these actually relate to each other. So those elements, those 5 elements we had, the management, the policy, performance, innovation and planning, the future generations, they sit across everything in this. They will sit across everything. And questions around each one of those elements will come out in each of the principles as well. We then have the principles, and as I said, the environmental, economic and social, the traditional pillars of sustainability are there. So 7 of them sit under the environment, 2 under the economic, 3 under the social. But we want to go a little bit of a step further, and it's partly a rethink of priorities because of COVID, because of the issues that we have at the moment, and try and use a One Health type approach. So One Health really wants to, it doesn't just treat an individual, it looks at everything around them as well. So to put this into an operational One Health type of approach, we're then looking at social issues in terms of personal health, the physical, mental health and safety and well-being of staff, of players, volunteers and visitors to your venue. The economic can be equated to community health, resilient supply chains with meaningful relationships with your suppliers, your communities and your other stakeholders. And then finally, the environmental can work with planetary health, understanding, minimizing and mitigating the impact, your impacts on natural systems. So that's our new approach, the One Health approach that we're wanting to take, and we'll use that in communicating these issues moving forward. So we are producing guidance on this. The guidance document has information for each of the elements and each of those principles. And again, I'll just give you an example. We're not giving all of the information today, I'll just give you examples of how this will work. So for the food and drink principle, for example, so for food and drink, to reduce the impact of food production, use and disposal by choosing local, seasonal, high welfare organic produce, minimise food waste. Where food waste is unavoidable, segregate, dispose of food waste in lower positive impact way, and then redistributing unused food. That's quite a long principle, quite a long definition, but hopefully the key elements sit in there. There's a section called What This Means. It actually tries to explain it a bit more clearly. So procurement of sustainable food can encourage and support farming practices that contribute to long-term fertility of soil. It can support and improve ethical and humane treatment of animals, and then we need a specialised waste treatment for food. So just give a bit of a clearer approach. The sustainability issue, too long to actually put up on a single slide, to just summarise here. So food production and consumption have a number of sustainability issues. So the actual resources that go into it, the water, the energy, nutrients, etc. Seasonality is an issue. Having balanced menus, reducing meat use, etc. Longevity and ongoing soil fertility, so production methods, managing food waste and redistributing edible food again. We've got a section on recommended good practice. This is bullet pointed into some key elements that we think are important. So you should have a food purchasing policy. You should have waste segregation and management in place. Using local providers as much as you can. Food redistribution, portion control, again, balanced menus, and record your food waste. So again, it's just, and this isn't everything that's in the recommended good practice for food and drink, but it just highlights some of the areas where we think you could be performing. And these will be reflected in the questions that are then asked when you actually come to run through the process. Under legal and other requirements, I'll just show our little caveat that we've made sure we've put into this, that we're not legal experts. So we've actually just specified legal requirements throughout the document, given for guidance only. It's not taken as comprehensive or to represent any kind of formal legal guidance. I'll say that now. Everybody needs to check their own legal requirements in there. But from our own experience of saying, what are the key pieces of legislation that we actually mean? So under food and drink, in fact, there are so many legal requirements, and for food in terms of, instead of preparation, food safety, storage, etc., but really specific to sustainability issues around food. There's no legislation as such that I'm aware of that we've identified. So in this case, it actually requires that we look at good practice, best practice. So there's some information in there, but we provide a list of certification schemes, brief information about them, and links to the different websites. Now, not necessarily saying that the 3 up there, and I think we've got about 8 listed within the guidance. They vary in terms of quality, they vary in terms of impact, but we're trying to inform people and give you the best information that's available, so you can actually say which one of these standards you want to go to. Other explanatory notes. Well, for food and drink, there are no other explanatory notes. For a few of the 12 principles, where information doesn't fit into one of those headings, we've slotted in some extra information. We link to the other principles, so we've put there's a paragraph under food and drink which explains how it links, for example, to energy and emissions, and to water and effluents, for example. And then we do link these things to relevant United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So under each one of the principles, where there's a link, we'll use the SDG icons, and we'll show where we think there is a link. So we're trying to match up to the SDGs as well. I will just acknowledge that a couple of people have written in questions. I will answer those at the end if people have on that. But I've got a couple of questions coming. Please do send them through on the chat. At the moment, this is what it looks like. We're still in the early phases. We want to get a few more people to do this. It is a Word document in terms of the guidance and the information that we send out. And it is an Excel spreadsheet as things stand. Fully intended that this will look and feel a lot better. It will be an online process. Like I said before, we will actually, at the moment, we will actually go through this process with you over a Zoom meeting. So at the moment, it is an Excel spreadsheet. This is how we'll capture the data. This is how we'll assess it. But it will become an online process. So this is just an example. This is obviously just a screen capture from one of the sheets in the spreadsheet document at the moment. So again, food and drink. Up at the top, obviously we've got the principle we already talked about, but then we've got the questions down here. Do you have a food purchasing policy in place? And the majority of the answers to these questions are going to be yes, no. The majority of the answers will be yes, no, and it's been created in that way intentionally to be relatively simple. There are notes over on this side, and then follow-up instructions as needed in that right-hand column. So if you answered yes to one, so if you answered yes to that first question, you go to the second question. If you answer no, you can just jump straight down to the next relevant question. You might have noticed there's a column on the left called status, and we've got required and good practice. Required are ones that we've identified as either being a legal requirement, and so you really should be doing, and if you say no to it, then we'll ask some questions. But also it's just best practice. We believe that this probably is a minimum standard that most venues ought to be doing. Now, if you're not doing it, it's not going to be, we're not going to chastise you over it, but the required ones are the ones that should be focused on, and they will be weighted slightly more highly. And the good practice is just recommendations. And hopefully this is where you can see that the framework element and the comments that people had made previously comes into it, because we're actually asking you to look at all 12. We're not saying you determine your own scope and you determine your own priorities. We are just saying, go through this list, look at these 12 elements of your business, and then go through these questions and tell us what you're doing. So if, for example, you're doing great stuff on your energy, you're doing great stuff on your waste management, but you haven't done very much at all around food and drink, this makes you think about food and drink. Now your conclusion might be, well, at the moment it's not my priority, but at least you can go away and say, well, maybe we should have a food purchasing policy in place. Maybe we should be talking a bit more about whether we segregate the food and how we redistribute food. So that's where it's expanded people's thoughts and expanded how people have actually looked at it. So the current position, like I said, this has taken a few iterations over a good number of years, 3 to 4 years. We've been looking at it. It's changed quite substantially across that time. But just in the last couple of months, we've had 2 venues go through this process. So Principality Stadium with Darren, and then Hattie Park, who many of you would have heard on one of our webinars earlier in the year, the sustainability manager of the All England Lawn Tennis Club, Wimbledon Tennis Championships, has also gone through the process for us. And we'll hear from them now, just their thoughts on it. Neither one is actually with us this afternoon. So again, this was recorded yesterday. So now I'm joined by Darren Crossman from Principality Stadium again, but we've also been joined by Hattie Park, who is the Sustainability Manager at the All England Lawn Tennis Club, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. Both have actually undertaken a first pass at the standard and have contributed to its development as well. So I just want to ask Darren and Hattie, so what was their thoughts on the process? Maybe Darren, I'll jump to you first. What was your thoughts on actually going through the process that we did?
So from a personal perspective, as we went through the process, by having all the guidance there and the questions, some of it was relatively straightforward and rolled off the tongue, information readily to hand, but a lot of it actually made me think in quite deep terms, and I have to go search in the deep annals of my brain for the information and then think about where I can find the evidence. But then there were a lot of questions on there that raised issues that I should know, but I don't know, and I didn't know. And it's made me think about our operation and our sustainable development in a much more detailed way.
I would echo that. When I was going through it, I really liked the way it was structured, and some of the things, as Darren said, straightforward, knew the answers. Other things I had to definitely go away and find out about, but it was very valuable from my point of view that I did have to go and do that, and now I know more about the organisation than I did beforehand. So I think similar experience probably to you, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
So you would say that having that structure, that framework in place in there actually made you think a bit more broadly, rather than it being a restricted scope that you actually determine yourself. maybe it made you think a bit more broadly and a bit more in depth about those issues?
Absolutely, absolutely. At first glance, when you look at it, you think, oh, well, this is going to be relatively simple and relatively straightforward. But as Hattie says, the way it's laid out and in the 12 sections, it makes life very simple from a thought process point of view, but actually collates everything together quite nicely. And it really is a challenge. It's not as simple as it would appear.
So but was it? So it was a useful challenge from your perspective, and a useful process to go through.
Very much.
And
yeah, and same here. I think the categories are really nice, and again, it kind of reinforces what I think we should be doing at the All England, and it reinforces the kind of what we're focusing on. But it's good to have those reminders. You know, it makes us think about culture and community, you know, food and drink as well. So maybe not the things that you would immediately think of. Yes, of course, energy waste, but going beyond that as well. So definitely a useful process, definitely.
I think I would add to that as well, that it gives you a very good idea, whereas other standards, other schemes may skew the data a little bit and make you think you're better than you are. This actually gives you a very realistic picture of where you are and how your accomplishments are and where you need to be.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. So that was an assessment from Darren and Hattie, who've been through the process. Hope that demonstrates from their perspective at least that they felt this was a useful process, that it actually expanded what they'd already been doing at their venues. So in terms of immediate actions moving forward, we're now looking for probably another 4, possibly 6 BASIS members to actually undertake a free assessment in return for their feedback and their information coming back to us. So we're actually keen just to really hone this down. We think we're there. The responses that I personally got from Darren and Hattie did make some changes. You know, they had to think a bit more, but I had to think a bit more as well in terms of actually writing the standard. Sorry, it's not a standard, it's a certification scheme. So we do want a little bit more data, we want a little bit more input coming through. Today is sort of the soft launch, effectively. This is the point where we're going public with it. But we do want a bit more data and a little bit more input to generate this robust product. And then we're looking for a public stroke media launch as soon as possible. Certainly want to do it this year, at the absolute latest in the new year, but within the next 2 to 3 months. So if there are BASIS members out there that are keen to actually go through the process with their venue, I should specify this, I should have said this right at the very beginning, apologies. This isn't for sort of individual one-off events. This is for bricks and mortar sort of asset owning venues specifically, because it does look at change over time. It does look at how you change your management systems within that venue. So it is very much for a venue in particular. So any venues that are out there, please do give us a shout. So it's over to you guys now if you've got questions, thoughts, etc. I do have a few already come through on the chat, which I dare say you can all see. So I'll run through these first. Be good if some of you actually want to ask a question and put your hand up and actually speak. Otherwise, it's just me droning on. But to start with, so Kate Fortnam has asked who will be assessing venues on behalf of BASIS. It will be BASIS ourselves. We don't have a third-party accreditation for this, so we will be going through this. Like I said, it's relatively simple. It's fairly objective from our perspective, we believe, and most of the value actually comes from talking through these questions with the person from the venue. So there's no subjectivity in terms of do we think you've done enough here or there. It really is, have you actually got a policy in place on this? If you say yes, you get a tick. Look, it's not going to be quite that simplistic, but it's almost that easy, that objective. So for now, if BASIS will be looking at this, it will be completely transparent to the venue themselves. You'll get a report back saying where you said yes, where you said no, and where we think you could improve. So Hannah has asked, is there more information on the copy of the guidance that can be circulated? Once it's completely finalised, once we've done the public and media launch, the information will be available on the website. It will be made available. At the moment, because we want to change a few bits here and there, then we won't distribute it generally. But if somebody wants to have a look at it, then drop me an email. Drop us an email at info@basis.org.uk, or personally to me at russell.seymour@basis.org.uk. So yeah, we're happy for people to have a look and for people to comment and assist us. But at the moment, it won't be generally publicly available. Phil, thank you. That's more of a comment than a question, but very happy to assist as well if you want to borrow some of the structure and guidance. Eleanor, will there be different size and types of facilities, organisations taking the free survey? Yeah, look, as far as we're concerned, we want this to work for the biggest stadia in the country, Principality Stadium being one of them, one of the biggest, most famous venues in the country, All England Lawn Tennis Club. But we want it to work for the local cricket club that owns its own pavilion, owns its own pitch and works there, or the local rugby club or whatever. It should work for all sizes, and it should work for professional venues. It should work for recreational venues. As long as there's a building, as long as it's using energy, generating waste, etc., this should fit. There may be different emphasis, but it should fit. Raf, would university sporting venues be able to apply for certification? Yes, absolutely. One of the best bits of feedback we actually had early on in the process was from the NUS, and they actually asked us lots of questions around student venues. So yes, we'd be really keen for university sports venues to apply. I'm trying to catch up. We're putting lots of messages through now. Apologies, it's just me chatting through. If anybody wants to raise a hand and ask their question in person, please do. Joe Thompson, are there criteria for the types of venue that the accreditation scheme applies to? No, I've got sort of two interpretations there, Joe. You may want to clarify if I don't answer this fully. We will be asking general questions about the venues, you know, in terms of size, capacities, those sorts of things, so we can actually assess that data. But in terms of are there criteria that would exclude or include anybody, like I said before, as long as it's a bricks and mortar venue, there for more than 1 year, so you can demonstrate improvement over time, then anybody, we believe anybody can take this scheme. We need to get that empirical data in. Michael Viggers. Thank you, more of a comment than a question there, but Michael, yeah, thank you. We definitely want to make sure that we get all across all of the sustainability issues. So Michael, for those of you not looking at the chat, is commenting that there's elements in there relating to health, healthy options, food and drink, etc. Pete Watts is asking about prices. This one has come to me privately because Pete is actually on the steering committee, and is asking about potential costs and prices. Is there a cost, or is it free to members? As things stand, there will be a cost to this. We're discussing, to be perfectly honest. My personal thought is at the moment we're looking at somewhere around £600 to £800 for this to be delivered, because it will take time. It will take a little bit of time for things to be written up. There would be a substantial reduction for that for a BASIS member. We always try and offer benefits to the members, so I would suggest it would probably be half that. But please, that's my thoughts. We're running through this, but there will be a cost to the members as well as to other venues that aren't members. But hopefully this will be a good benefit to the members. Don't take those figures absolutely definite. Get back in touch. Ask a question of us fairly soon. Hannah has just asked exactly the question about cost for venues wanting to participate. Don Parsons from the RFU. Have you got an example of the final assessment results? Not in terms of publicising what those two individual venues have done. I can probably distribute something that shows how we will do it. So within each of the 12 principles, there's a varying number of questions in each. Some of them around, for example, waste management. There's, off the top of my head, I think it's 23 questions in there, which sounds quite in-depth. Well, it's intended to be in-depth. Whereas, I'm trying to think of another one. I think under biodiversity at the moment, I think there's 8 questions in there. So slightly more limited. They'll then be weighted, and you'll get a final score. So you'll get a score for each of the principles, and then you'll get an overall score as well for the ranking. And it will be, initially, it's going to be presented as a graphic, almost only a bar chart of some sort to then show you where you've improved. And then in subsequent years, you'll get the other bar charts linked to that as well. Should have stopped sharing before. Sorry, excuse me, I'm just scrolling through. William Powell. If you provide a temporary event overlay on the stadium for a given period of time, how would it benefit the organisation running the event? Let's reread that. I would say the standard or the scheme as such that we put together is kind of ignores what goes on there. We would want to know your level of activity, the things you're doing. Be one of the questions that we ask, because clearly a venue that is doing something every other day is going to have a very different performance to one that is, I'll say only, but working at every other weekend and only during a certain season. So we'd want to know the events that are going on there. But in terms of a particular event coming in to a venue, this wouldn't be directly relevant. It's more relevant to the venue overall. So I hope that is what the intention of that question was. Rich Parker, application. Would building on Clubmark be a better option? We'd be happy to talk to Sport England on Clubmark. It would be up to the smaller clubs. So not sure about application for smaller clubs who don't have time or money for formal quality systems. Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. We could add something in another conversation around Clubmark. For us, look, if a recreational community club came to us and said we want to do something, we would talk about the cost. It's not about excluding people. It's not about bases making a huge amount of money. We do need to make something to tick over and support the members. But it's not about making big profits out of clubs. So we have a conversation around it. Hopefully, one aspect of this is that there's no requirement to write up anything in addition to what you're already doing. What we're effectively doing in that 2.5 hours or so, where we sit down and go through the process, in that 2.5 hours or so, we're just saying, what are you doing at the moment? And if you're not doing something in a particular area and that sparks an interest in you and your club members, then go away and change it. And then we'll reassess in a year's time and you will have improved performance. So hopefully this is, you could literally say to us, we want to do this, we'll set up a meeting, 2.5 hours of your time, you get a report back. And it's, in theory, very little more than that. So hopefully this isn't something where you need to write out reams of or significant amounts of information about your management system moving forward. And Kate's asked about, for governing bodies, might there be an opportunity for joint branding for certification for clubs incentive? Absolutely. But one of the things we would love to be able to do is to work with governing bodies, with leagues. We've had a couple of conversations already, but the current COVID issues make things tricky at the moment to make definite commitments. We would love to be able to roll this out across a whole league, across a whole a governing body and all of their clubs. If we can do that, if there is a governing body out there listening to this who wants to say, we'll run a pilot scheme for this, From my perspective, from a basis perspective, we'll get a good amount of data. And data is important. And look, one element I'll be open on this. No data. We have said no individual performance data will be published unless there's a reason, unless we want to produce a case study. But then we would always get permission of the venue that's involved. But the generalized data will actually give basis a much better handle on the actual impact of the sports sector in the UK. So we're interested from a data perspective as well. We want to provide a service to the venues, to you guys who might want to do this, but it provides us with data and it gives us information, proper empirical data that we can then go back to them and say, you know, we need to expand this up, but a good estimate for the carbon footprint of all of sport ideally, but you know, we've assessed X number of cricket clubs. This is the average, so we'll extrapolate that up. This is what we think the carbon footprint is, or this is what we think the waste management issues are. So it gives, there's a benefit to basis in gathering some of this data, but it will always be anonymized. So if we can engage with a league or a governing body, we will have that data for that league or governing body, and that will go back to them, and they've got a much better idea in terms of central management and the information they need to put out to their clubs. I'm worn out. I rattled through all of those questions quite quickly. Thank you. Let's got to the end of those. Does anybody else have any other questions, or does anybody else want to ask the question in person? From my perspective, it's good to get that out there, to be honest. It's been a long time that we've been thinking on this and wanting to put this out. We're now at the position where we feel quite strongly that it's ready to go out there to the public. If anybody does want to, going back to one of the questions earlier, I think it was Hannah asked, is the guidance available, is the information available? The information around the structure, the information around the guidance, I'm happy to share that. On a personal level, they do all have marked up on them confidential, not for distribution. So we'd ask that you don't circulate them too far, because we want to make sure that we've got it as good as we want it to be. So I'm happy to share that if individuals want to take a look, and please feedback and give us some comments. But equally, if there's any basis members on this webinar that you want to put your hand up and say, give us a free assessment, and it will be the only opportunity to get a free assessment, I would suggest. So please let us know and just give us your feedback as well. We just had another question come through. Would a community facility used for physical activity stroke sport as just one part of a much wider community program be able to participate? I would say yes, if it's in a particular building. In a sense, I guess, we're talking about this in terms of a club or a particular venue. Maybe in my head, I've got a professional sports venue, a football club or cricket club or whatever in my mind. But from a community perspective, as long as it's a building and there is data related to that building in terms of energy, in terms of waste, etc., we would assess the building. Now, in terms of if there are other aspects to that in terms of breaking down X amount of time that was for whatever, you know, if it's a shared facility between rugby and cricket, or if it's a local leisure centre where it's multi-sport, etc., to be able to break it down further would be a harder thing to do. But if it's a building, if it's a bricks and mortar building, this certification could apply to it. It would need kind of a single management structure there and somebody who understands across the board. But yes, absolutely, it could apply to any kind of building. Kate has more of a comment than anything. Yeah. So from my perspective, I will take on board all of the comments that have come through. We'll make sure we save everything. This webinar will be available to review. It will be put up on the BASIS website. So if you do want anybody else to take a look at this, please do. We want any amount of feedback to come back to us. Look, it's only as good as the feedback that we get. and like I say, we're happy to share some information. So drop us an email if you want a bit more information on it. And we will certainly keep you all in the loop, all updated, moving forward. Yeah, thank you very, very much. The next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, the 11th of November. I'm saying that from memory. Please check that my dates are correct, but I believe it's Wednesday, the 11th of November. It's about sustainability in design and build, and we will be sending out a lot more information nearer the time. But it's already listed up on the BASIS website, so please do take a look. So with that, please do get in touch if you want any more information, but I've been talking for too long. I'm very grateful for your time this afternoon. Hopefully it was interesting, and very happy to get into a conversation with anybody and everybody. But BASIS members, please let us know. We want to get at least four more of you to take this on and give feedback as well. But with that, we will close. Thank you very, very much, and we'll speak to you soon.